Mishra, Professor Sanjay Kumar, students, faculty members, guests. It's really a very, very great pleasure to be at BHU. And you probably think I say this at every university I go. But I mean it, and I mean it for three reasons. I'm here partly because it was for me an opportunity to witness and participate in the Kashi Tamil Sangamam, where your university has played such a prominent role. I'm also here because as we get on with our G20 presidency, and I would like to talk to you about it later, Kashi is one of the important venues where meetings of the G20 will take place. One of the meetings which will take place is the Development Ministers meeting, which I will be chairing. So if you, at some stage, you are very likely to see me in a street somewhere in the city at some point of time. But there was a third personal reason why I was very happy to come here. As you can see from our biodata, I studied mainly in Delhi, in Delhi University and JNU. But my father-in-law was actually a student here from 1944 to 1948. And even after so many years, and he's 96 and growing strong, he had what we used to say was a BHU stamp on him. That his outlook towards life, his work ethic, there are many things without ever having visited BHU, I associate with the university because of my relationship with him. So he from time to time asks me, you travel around in India, have you ever gone to my university? So I'd be very happy to call him up and say, yes, I finally did. On that question, did I ever meet a foreign minister before? To be honest, I don't think so, but I must tell you, this was an era of, JNU is known for student activism. Those days it was very constructive activism. At least we thought so. Actually, and by the way, in fact, again, when I think of that period, one of my closest friends of that period was also a student from BHU who had been a university president in BHU before he went on to be a JNU Students' University president. But I would say probably the most important person of note I had met as a student was George Fernandez. George Fernandez as a political leader, this is before he actually became minister, so I will repeat Nirmalaji's answer. Ministers were out of reach at that time. I hope that is no longer the case. So, but let me come to the topic of the day. I thought that the prospect of a rising India in a changing world order is something which is not only timely, but I believe very essential for all of you to know. All of you to know because your lives are ahead of you. When I, imagine what the next 50, 60 years will be like and where India would be, I see a lot of possibilities, and the responsibility of our generation is to make you imagine that, to make you think about it, to think about it ambitiously. And that is one reason why I wanted to speak about it. But the second is also that the world is changing. The world is changing at a faster and faster pace. And there are things happening in the world which don't stay outside anymore. They come right to your doorstep. I mean, yesterday I was on an Aaj program and we were discussing this very thing. What has changed in the world? What has changed in the world is something which happens thousands of kilometers away within a matter of a few days can actually impact your personal life very, very directly. And the best example I can give to you is of COVID. That in the old days, you could not have imagined this kind of rapid spread of a pandemic across the world. Or if you see today what is happening in the Ukraine conflict and the consequences of that, consequences of inflation, price rise, we at least have been a little bit, I would say, more fortunate or better planned. Many countries have taken a very big financial hit because of that. They've had food shortages, fertilizer shortages. So the world and you are more and more connected, and therefore it's particularly important for you to understand and appreciate the changing world. So what is it when we talk, when we speak about a changing world order? What do we actually mean? Well, the foundation of the world order was obviously the situation that prevailed at the end of the Second World War, 1945. And the world order started changing actually within a few years. And within a few years, in a set of events in which your own university had a very big role, which was the independence of India. That as India became independent, as it triggered the independence of other countries, the decolonization process set into motion the first big changes in the world order. And the more it unfolded, obviously the more the order changed. But at its heart, at the core, the order was still the same. There were 5 very powerful countries which in many ways, by different methods, wielded a lot of influence. And in the initial years, if you look at 50s and 60s, there were countries who were politically independent, but not economically independent. And therefore, even the political independence was very, very limited by that factor. Now, after a few decades, the next set of forces in the changing world order started, which was the economic changes. The economic changes in terms of new centers of production and consumption. And you saw East Asia, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia take the lead, followed by China. Then there was a gap, in my view, a very costly gap of about 15 years, where India also started to reform. So you had the first wave of political changes, the second wave of economic changes. Then there were some very special issues, like the nuclear issue, because the 5 countries who really dominated the world were all nuclear powers, and they had made a treaty which said only we 5 will be nuclear powers. So the nuclear changes started after another 20 years. So you had by the 1998 nuclear test, which Prime Minister Vajpayee authorized, you had the nuclear changes come into being. But there were changes which were also happening in a way beyond our control. They were not necessarily triggered by us. We participated in them, and I would say we benefited by some of them. Maybe we also had some damage from some part of it. And those were the globalization changes. So if you looked from the 1990s, the spread of technology, greater mobility, businesses going to other countries. And so the political, the economic, the nuclear, the globalization, by the time we reached the beginning of this century, the world was actually beginning to look very, very different. But the world is habitual, like people are. Nobody changes habits unless they are compelled to change habits. You don't like getting up early, nobody can make you get up early unless you have a class which forces you to get up early. So the action forcing event was the global financial crisis of 2008. At that stage, the Western countries, there was a group called G7, which were all Western countries of Europe and North America. They realized they could not handle this crisis on their own. They needed a China in the conversation. They needed a Japan. Japan was part of it. They needed a Korea. They definitely needed an India. And the G7 became the G20. That same G20 which is also going to come to Kashi this next summer. Now, that was one example of a change. But once change started, it went in different directions, not always in a very predictable manner. So you had new groupings, you had new institutions. So there was something like the BRICS, there was something like the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. A few years before, you had something like the Quad. So the change started throwing up new groupings, new practices, new institutions, new ideas. But in all of this, there were some countries who were rising. They were rising by themselves, I mean, obviously in relationship with the world, but their national power started to make a big difference to the overall global situation. I would say the most impactful has been the rise of China. After that, with a gap, not maybe at the same pace, has been the rise of India. There are some others also who are in that pathway. And as a consequence, the overall influence of the West in the global order has come down. The West is still a very dominant force, but if you were to say, compare it to 1945, 55, 65, 75, today in 2022, obviously the economic share of the West, the political influence, the military reach, all these are not as dominant as they used to be before. There were two other factors which I think is important for us to understand the change. One, today the enormous role played by technology. That technology, this term data is new oil. Data actually means technology. That technology is today a key factor in balance of power, the way military capabilities used to be, soldiers used to be, or weapons used to be before. And on the world itself, my final point, which is that the result of all of this is today what we have the beginnings of what is called the multipolar world, many centers of power. So it's not too like it used to be in the Cold War. There are many more, and the general expectation of the world is that India too will be in the coming years one of the poles of the world. So that is the state of the world. Now let us look how did India fare during this period. So that brings me to again asking this question. We speak about the rise of India. What do we mean by the rise of India? Well, you will say the most obvious is the economic rise. Today, India is the fifth largest economy in the world. Probably in the space of the next few years, become the third largest economy in the world. Yes, that is absolutely correct, but it's only part of the answer. India is also, when you say rise of India, today India is much more dominant regionally. Many of you, I say this to the students, would be surprised that there was an era that when I was your age in a university, the world actually used to see India and Pakistan on equal terms. Today, nobody does, not even the Pakistanis. So the fact that we have clearly today come out in that region as the primary power. Obviously, we have neighbors, we have to, and I will speak about that, we have to have very strong and positive relationships with them. But it isn't just in power terms, it is in economic terms, it is in trade terms, it is in mobility terms, how people move amongst each other. And there's no question today India is the sort of focus, the fulcrum of this region. Another expression of the rising India is actually our political stature. Now, political stature could mean we are members of more organizations. We are today members of the Security Council. This is our last month of this presidency. Hopefully, in some years, we'll be back in the Security Council. There are many, export control groups that we have joined, many new groupings of which we are members. But it is also our ability to shape the global agenda. That has also become more visible. If you look today at the big discussions in the world, what happens when leaders meet to discuss climate change, or black money, or tax rates, or terrorism, or maritime security. what India says, what India advocates, what India influences actually is more and more uh, visible. I spoke about new groups of which India is a member, which too is a reflection of our higher standing. The most prominent of that is Quad. There's also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and very recently, last year, we started something with Israel, UAE, and America called I2U2. There are new institutions, and by the way, many of these institutions are institutions which the idea came from India. In fact, many of them came personally from the Prime Minister. We have the International Solar Alliance, we have the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Uh, we are now, just a few months ago, we had a campaign, a mission called Lifestyle for Environment, which is Prime Minister's very strong belief that if we all changed our lifestyle, if we change everyday lifestyle in a very sensible manner, we will make a huge difference to the environment. So there are today a whole set of institutions, ideas, campaigns that are coming out of India. The fact that the world accepts it, and not just accepts it. Today, Solar Alliance, for example, has more than 100 countries who are members of it. So that shows you something as well. Then there is the impact of the diaspora. Uh, Today in the world, there are something like between 32 to 34 million people in the world, 3.2 to 3.4 crores, who are either of Indian origin or who are Indians. And we today are playing an increasingly important role in the global workplace. And these Indians, when they go out and their success stories, they shape the image of India. And when the world, for example, looks at the rise of India, for them the contribution and successes of the diaspora is part of the story of the rise of India. So that is something which is very important. But equally, we too have a responsibility we didn't have earlier. If so many Indians live abroad, it's our duty to look after them. When the COVID happened, one of our big discoveries was really how many Indians worked abroad. You'd really be surprised how many people there were in the shipping industry, merchant shipping, how many people were working in cruise liners, how many air crew there were in different airlines, how many people had gone as construction workers in the Gulf, how many people had gone as temporary tech support workers across Europe and America. So the what we did there, which was the biggest ever evacuation mission in the history of the world, we brought back almost 7 million people. So just think to yourself, these 7 million people, if they are our asset and strength to the country in the good times, the country too has that responsibility of looking after them in the tough times. There may be people like this, but there are also students. You would have brothers and sisters and cousins and friends who would have chosen to go abroad. And they too are our responsibility. Today we have 1 million students abroad, 1 million Indian nationals abroad as students. And that too, looking after them, which you saw that we did that in Ukraine. That too is a responsibility. But this is part of the rise of India, because for the rest of the world, they can see India's presence. They can see India's presence among their own society, as students, as doctors, as tech people, as I said, as all these service providers. So the cumulative impact of this on the world is actually huge. Then there are some parts of India which come out of our capabilities. One obvious one, of course, is the IT side. But the IT side, 10 years, 15 years ago, it used to be India as the back office of the world. That too is changing. Today, India and Indians are increasingly seen as innovators. I was in the US a few months ago, and some of you may have followed that today there's a big there's a big competition going on in chips in the semiconductor industry. And a representative of the American semiconductor industry told me that American companies, by his account, had at least 40,000 engineers working on chip design alone in India. So you have to imagine today, what does the world think about us? The world sees that talent, world sees that skill. The world is trying to integrate it into their business and supply chain models. Another example is the image of India as the pharmacy of the world. You know, as foreign minister, I still travel 20, 25 times, even during COVID, for reasons of work. And I cannot tell you today how much our image in the world has changed because of vaccine mattering. That there are countries, I've had ministers say in public, in say Central America, that there were centers of production of vaccine closer to us, but yet we got our vaccines from India. So the fact that we were still vaccinating our people and yet willing to share vaccines at that time, the fact that we could actually increase our pharmaceutical capacity, sometimes 3x, 5x, 10x, depending on the medicines. You know, there was at that time during COVID, I was also part of the group of ministers dealing with the COVID response. There was a huge demand for paracetamol. And our paracetamol production, actually our industry was able to ramp it up phenomenally. And we actually really at that time were meeting the global demand of paracetamol from our factories in India. So when I speak of the rise of India, I wanted to illustrate to you, it is not a phrase in international relations. There are physical indices, there are actual experiences, there are sort of, I would say, relationships, transactions, impact on people's lives, which is what make them feel that India is not what the India of the past used to be. So what could we do more? You know, how do we rise faster as the world changes? And I have a few thoughts here. If you ask me to sum it up in a single phrase, I would say if India could really become a successfully Atmanirbhar Bharat, it will help us enormously in our rise. For this reason, a big country like India needs deep strengths. It cannot be vulnerable to other countries for its basic requirements. Because we saw during COVID, when other parts of the world shut down, the problems that it created in India. So the more that we are able to do, and again, this is not an advocacy of protectionism. You know, no country today can be, fully self-sufficient. That era is over. But the more we develop our strengths, the more we will have an importance in the world, because we will be relevant to the rest of the world. The second part of it is, how do we ourselves develop those strengths? And there I would say, especially with the COVID experience, there are three big domains where I would underline to you that big changes are happening in society. Changes that are driven by the vision of the Prime Minister and the government. One is digital. There is a huge digital revolution, and I use the word revolution very, very consciously, in this country. But if you see the digital delivery which is happening on a scale which the rest of the world is just staggered by the numbers and by the services we do. The second is the green growth. That if we have to grow, and we are growing 7%, 8%, we must grow greener and greener. Because the cost of not going green will be to undo the growth to get better growth. So in a sense, we have the advantage because we are a relatively late grower. We have many technologies which were not there earlier. So how do we grow more greenly? And the third, of course, is our health and our human indices, which is from the time, babies are born, maybe even before. How do we improve the quality of health, quality of our human resources, quality of our skills, of our talents, of our education? Because at the end of the day, India's greatest resource is its people. There are countries who have done, who live on mining, who live on oil, who live on other resources. our resources eventually are people. And this is particularly important because we are moving into an age of knowledge economy. And in a knowledge economy, the power of the brain will be bigger than the power of everything else. So the more we are able to improve the quality of human resources, actually you are building India. So when they say that universities are nation builders, as your Vice Chancellor did, believe me, take it literally. That it is actually today the quality of our universities which is going to determine India's standing in the world as much as the quality of our military or the quality of our diplomacy. The second, of course, is in our own neighborhood. I would say after 2014, we have fundamentally changed the manner we work. We have decided what we call neighborhood first policy, that we would engage all our neighbors very proactively, but barring one who was a particular problem, but engage most of our neighbors and engage them in a way in which it will be generous, it will be non-reciprocal. We want to build connectivity, long-term relationships, contacts, mobility. The third, of course, depending our prospects would depend how we face up to the challenge from China, because as you can see on the border, there is a challenge, and there's no getting away from that. The fourth is a challenge we've had for many, many years, which is the challenge of cross-border terrorism. So how do we delegitimize terrorism? Because the issue is not vis-a-vis a country. The issue is vis-a-vis a phenomenon. Because if that phenomenon were not to happen, then the country is not an issue. So the real challenge for us is how do you make a country addicted to terrorism to give up that practice? The fifth is that we need to become a bigger maritime power because today a very large part of the global trade is moving through the Indian Ocean, and a large part of ours is moving through the Pacific Ocean. So the bigger we get economically, the more will be our stakes, and it's important both for our own interests and for global interests that we do that. As I said, we need to become a technology power because of the knowledge economy. We need to remain an independent power because finally the world will respect a country which stands up for itself, which has its own well-defined interests, which is able to articulate them. So how do you maintain your independence in a very polarized world where there are strong debates and high passions? At the same time, how do you work with other countries? Because you can remain independent and isolated, but that is bad diplomacy. In this, in this very complex world, everybody needs friends and partners. So how do we find friends and partners with whom we are willing to work? And in the past, to use a phrase of the Prime Minister, there have been hesitations of history. We were reluctant to work with countries. The obvious example is the US, even though there were a lot of shared interests. So how do we develop the confidence to be independent and yet have the ability to work with others? Then, of course, there is the issue of, to my mind, of how do we project our culture more strongly? Because projecting our heritage and culture today is essential in a world where a large part of the contestation is a battle of ideas. It is, who defines rights and wrongs, what is right and wrong, what is the norm, what is not the norm. These are today increasingly big issues in the global debates. And finally, for a country like India, given our history, I think it's particularly important that we continuously strengthen our national unity because in the past, if you look at our history, that has been a point of weakness. So, very briefly, as I said, I've given you a sense of the changing world, the rise of India, what can make India rise more. And I'll finish with a few words on the G20. As I said, the G20 presidency has already started. It is an exceptional responsibility. It is an exceptional responsibility because these are the 20 most powerful, most impactful, most influential countries in the world. And whoever has the chair of that grouping has that ability to set the agenda, to shape the directions, to influence the debates. So it is a responsibility, but if well used, it is also an opportunity. The second point I would make is it's an exceptional responsibility, but it is happening at an exceptional time. Because today's world is, by any standards, exceptionally difficult. We are seeing the impact of the COVID, economic, financial crises, which started some of it even before the COVID, the impact of the Ukraine war, the polarization of the Ukraine war, the more and more climate events, continuing terrorism. So this is a tough time. It's a tough world. So how do you take more responsibility in tough times? That is something which I think this country has to face up to. But it's an exceptional responsibility in exceptional times, but which I assure you will be handled exceptionally. Because typically, countries do big diplomatic events in the capital. It's a conference. It's people come, people go. You will see it on the TV, you will see it on your phone, or you will read about it in newspapers if you still read newspapers. But this time, that's not how it's going to happen. This time, we are going to take the G20 across the country to every state, to almost 60 cities of India. We're going to. Yesterday, Prime Minister had a virtual meeting with all the chief ministers and many of the governors. And his message to them was, this is a time to showcase India, the changes in India, the capabilities of India, the culture of India. Just ask yourself, today there's a Kashi Tamil Sangamam taking place. And I know that there are many things there which many people in Kashi would not have known had that event not happened. And probably many people in Tamil Nadu would not have known. Now, if that is the gap between two parts of India, imagine what is the gap between parts of India and the rest of the world. That today, this is an opportunity for us. That the world, it's not in our interest that the world thinks that India is Delhi. India is not Delhi. India is very much bigger than Delhi. There are many cultures, there are many, languages, obviously. There is a diversity of India. And we have this opportunity today to present the entirety of India before the world. That is what is our intention. And at the same time, because, again, one of the messages which the Prime Minister asks all his ministers to give is to ask the youth of our country in some way to find ways of joining up or supporting or relating to such events. So if something is happening in Kashi due to G20, I hope that the university at the same time would also do something which you believe is most appropriate, so that there is an association of what is happening on the world stage with what is happening in your own academic and daily life. We want G20 to be like a national celebration. We do not want it to be like a Sarkari program. So that is the plea, Vice Chancellor, that I have for you and all the students. And as I said, I myself hope to come back for some of the events which I will be chairing. So once again, it's a great pleasure to be here. I thank you for the opportunity. And if there are any questions, comments, thoughts, I'd be very happy to listen.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very insightful talk. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility, and we here in Banaras Hindu University assure you that we are prepared to shoulder that responsibility. And you would be glad to know that today in the audience we have students from across disciplines, largely from Malviya Center for Peace Research and Department of Political Science, and some international students who have joined us here. In your talks, you not only shared the physical indices and the various categories that actually sort of authenticate how India is emerging as a global power, but also the challenges that we have ahead of us and the way forward. So, on that note, sir, we have collected some questions prior to the talk, and there are 5 questions. Would you like to take them one by one, or would you like to take two in one go? Okay, thank you. There's a question from MMV. Currently, India remains isolated from supranational bodies like SAARC. Moreover, India has opted out of the RCEP. This self imposed isolation does not fit with India's ambition to become a global power. How pragmatic is this approach? Now, the second question is from Mahima Tripathi, a master's student in the Department of Political Science. Respected sir, there have been numerous debates on the neutral stance of India over some issues and taking stand on others. There have been terms like sitting on the fence and sitting on the ground. How do you expect us, the IR students, to see these terms as? We have the vision of India as the global leader, and for securing that position, we need to have a clear stance over contentious issues. What is your stance? I would like to know. Thank you.
The first question, I don't think we are isolated from the SAARC. Why is the SAARC currently not active? SAARC is currently not active because one member of the SAARC believes that dealing with other neighbors is compatible with the practice of cross-border terrorism. Now, we have reached a stage today where we don't think the two can happen side by side. So, if you ask me today, what is holding up SAARC? Because do look at this period. If you look at India, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, India, Maldives, India, Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar, even India, Mauritius, India, Seychelles, each one of these relationships has grown in the last 5 years. The trade has grown, investments have grown, cooperation has grown. So we want regionalism. We see benefits in it. We think everybody would get. But the problem we faced when it came to SAARC was, how do you deal with somebody in the room who actually is sitting with you on the table by the day and actually sending people over with guns at night? And that is a problem. So the RCEP was a different issue. See, when RCEP, what happened was we had a set of concerns. We were very honest about it. We put those concerns on the table. There were round after round after round of negotiations. So finally, when it came to joining RCEP, we had to make a kind of a cost-benefit analysis. Is it good for the Indian economy to join, or is it damaging for the Indian economy to join? And here is the challenge for the Indian economy. If you looked at the RCEP partners, the one with the lowest per capita income was India. We are the nation of all the potential partners, we were the one with the smallest producers. So if we had an exposure which was damaging economically, it would be damaging socially and possibly in other ways thereafter. So RCEP was, in any big decision, nations do not rush into it sort of blindly or say, I started something, so I'll now switch off my calculator and go ahead and do it because I started it. So you are calculating all the time, and finally when the time comes to take a call, which happened in October of 2019, I was with the Prime Minister when he took the call. And his view was, when we saw what was on offer from other RCEP countries, we believed that it was not in our national interest. But I want to tell you, after that, we have done an FTA with Australia, we've done an FTA with UAE, we are negotiating FTAs today with UK and with EU. So it's not that India is isolated. And by the way, our exports have grown in this whole thing and grown fairly massively. So the second question, do you take stance, neutral, not neutral? First of all, I will say it's sometimes very useful to take clear-cut stance. Sometimes it's not. Clarity is not always a virtue. There are situations where you don't want to be clear, where you actually have, concerns and interests which may pull you in different directions, or where you don't want to show your hand very openly in public. So, as we get, as our stand matters more to the world, and that is also part of the rise of India, we will come under pressure. There will be countries, who have never taken a clear stand on our problems, asking us to take a clear stand on theirs. But that is their diplomatic skill or diplomatic effort. So, for us today, when we look at the world, I think there are multiple levels you work with. The most basic is what is in the interest of your people, what is your national interest. The next level you can say is, if you have friends and partners, where are their interests, how much do you accommodate them. The next level would be, if there are big issues of principle at stake, how do you reconcile, the bigger issues with the immediate issues of interest. So diplomacy is about finding a balance. The complexity of being a diplomat is to be able to think short, medium, long, all at the same time, different domains at the same time, multiple players at the same time, and then try and distill all of this into a clear-cut or not clear-cut position, as it may be.
Thank you. This is not a question, it's actually a suggestion from Professor Sanjay Srivastava from Department of Political Science. A humble suggestion to bring Kashi more and more into Indian foreign policy, as it symbolizes India's culture, civilization, and historicity. So basically, the civilizational anchorage that Kashi has, and you've mentioned in your talk as well that you would be, Kashi is going to be, so just that. And then now we have two more questions. India's position as a G20 presidency has come at a time when world is feeling a lot of problems and challenges, beginning from Chinese aggression to Taiwan, food and energy security problem caused by the Russian-Ukraine crisis. How is India going to tackle these challenges while bringing forward its policy? And given the context that you've outlined, don't you think that BHU must have
This is another question.
This is the other question. This is the second question. Do you want me to?
No, please.
Yeah, okay. Given the context that you have outlined, don't you think that BHU must have a full international relations department? Right now we have Department of Political Science, and IR is part of the Political Science department.
I'd like to respond to that first comment as well, because honestly, I would be, one of the subjects which interests me is different countries, especially bigger countries with a longer history, have developed their traditions of diplomacy, their language of diplomacy, their concept of diplomacy, their thinking of diplomacy. And when I was in China about a decade ago, little more than a decade ago, it was something which interested me. I saw there was a lot of work going on in China about how do you take, when you teach people, we so easily use this word Trojan horse. Okay? Trojan horse is from somebody else's story. Okay, I'm not diminishing the story, it's a very interesting story. But where is our Trojan horse? Why don't, when we give examples, why don't we cite from our epics, our history, our culture, our metaphors? And also, I would say, in some ways, revive a lot of our traditions of knowledge. One of the very interesting byproducts of this COVID era has been actually how much more interested the world has been in what they would have otherwise said is alternative therapies. Okay, so it could be in any domain, but I think for me, part of the rise of India would be to delve back into our culture, to pull from it, the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience, all of that, and really see how do we do that. And I must say, if this thought, so when I was writing my book, because it's something, I'd long discussed with my siblings and with my father, which is we would use examples from Mahabharata, sometimes to actually describe people. You wanted a code word sometimes in the family, so you would use some word. So when I looked at Mahabharata and I told myself, I mean, look, there is so much of diplomatic complexity out there. Now, today, even though people don't think of it in the same way, Ramayana, we think of Mahabharata as statecraft. We think of Ramayana as a more sort of story of virtuous governance. But I'm actually rereading Ramayana to kind of come up with a diplomatic distillation of what are the various aspects. I mean, if Lord Rama, for example, is able to get the Vanar Sena together, in today's world it would be called coalition building. How do you get different people to work with you for a common purpose? So, if there are any ideas, can I make Kashi more central? I assure you, I'm in the market for it. I'll be very, very happy. Please send it. So the second question, these challenges you have, you mentioned some of them. These are so. I mean, no, there's no getting away from it. But today, our country has reached a point where we cannot duck many of those challenges. We may be guarded in our position, we may be prudent in our voting, we may be very nuanced in our articulation, but the problem is still there. The problem doesn't go away because you've handled it in a certain way. So, our effort, today is how do we prepare the country really to take on more and more challenges? Because if, as the fifth largest economy, you already have this set of issues, imagine what it would be when you are the third or maybe even higher. That our responsibilities will grow. In fact, I'll say your responsibilities will grow because you are the young people who will actually see that world for which all of us have been working for. So, getting into that mindset, which is there are issues, how do I prepare for them? How do I have the sometimes it's a matter of confidence. That how do you actually stand your ground? How do you explain to people that I note your point, but I don't entirely I cannot have the same position because my interests are different. So, and the third issue, the political science, the international relations issue, I can only say this, Vice Chancellor, I started as a political science student. It was 2 wonderful years, I learned a lot, but I then did 4 years as an IR student. So, I'm sure the decision is yours.
Thank you, sir. On the note of tracing what one would ambitiously call as decolonizing knowledge, indigenous knowledge, you would be very happy to know that in my department, political science, we offer a course which is ancient and political thought in modern India, in which we actually engage texts like Kautilya's Arthashastra, Shanti Parv from Mahabharata, and other epic texts in which we kind of trace the history of diplomacy or statecraft. So we would be very useful for you in your larger pursuit.
I'm willing to come in as a guest lecturer.
Yes, we would be very happy to invite you. We would be very, very happy to invite you. We are inviting you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just last 2 questions. In today's discussion is from Aman, a master's student at Malya Center for Peace Research. In today's unstable and dynamic world, how can India, as a global leader, contribute towards stability of the world order by maintaining and balancing its own interest? What is your take on this? And this is a longish question from Soumya Iyer, a doctoral researcher at the Malya Center for Peace Research again. When Indian students go abroad for studies, especially in STEM programs, they often receive stay-back options to pursue careers in their designated fields. India, and especially Kashi Hindu Vishwavidyalaya, being a hotspot for education in certain fields such as religion, philosophy, linguistics, culture, arts, what does it offer in terms of job potential for students completing masters and doctoral research in any of the post or any other postgraduate program? I think the second question is
I
more.
kind of lost that. I mean,
So
in
how-
essence, what does that mean?
So basically, what are the kind of options that India can generate, like the
For-
other countries do for stay-back programs and job opportunities after pursuing a degree of this?
Yeah, but the stay back programs are for foreign students in America. The question is for foreign students in India or for Indian students in India? I guess both, no?
The question, yeah.
For foreign students in India. Okay. One, the stability of the global order. We are. There are two ways of looking at it. One is our overall approach to the world. We are a country, a polity, a civilization which has generally been, I would say, engaging the world through non-military sort of instruments. If you look at Indian history, you know, you don't have too many examples of Indians militarily foraying out. And I point that to you not just as a example of strategic caution, but as of a temperament. That the Indian temperament is to find ways of engaging other societies through culture, through trade, through faith. Uh, so if you keep that temperament, which I think we still have as a society, today there's also a self-interest. We are still at a fairly early stage of our growth. We are still a society with a $2,000 per capita income. China is today in excess of $10,000. Countries of the of Europe are $50,000, $60,000. We have a stake today in global stability. We need that stable environment so that our energies are applied as much to nation building and to national growth as possible. So whether it is our temperament or whether it's a cold calculation, I would suggest to you today that India will always weigh in on the side of stability and sobriety in international relations. And my sense is a large part of the world understands that. One of the reasons why people want us in different groupings is precisely that this is a stable, sensible, careful power which doesn't do alarming things, and I think that's very much part of our collective persona. On the stay back, I must say I would like to talk to my colleague, education minister, and think about it because you've seen that we made this big push to have more international students, and part of the reason is the presence of international students is one part of making our universities more competitive, more networked, more capable. Uh, I do not know if anybody in our system has quite worked on this stay back aspect, but since you put the thought in my head, I'll be very happy to check it. But I personally think it's a good idea.